50 years to carry that report's recommendations out. At a similar rate of progress, they could work through this report, if they had one here, at the rate of one per year, and by the year 2025 or perhaps 2050, they would be halfway through the report. They would be. That's where we could be if the government and the NDP had listened to the Liberals instead of listening to their own perverse inclinations. Now, Mr. Speaker, I see that the clock is quickly approaching the hour of 6 o'clock. And so we all have to await a future installment to continue this lecture over the passage of time as to what happened and where we could be as compared to where we are, had the government but listened to the Liberals. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We reached the moment of interruption. The subject of this evening's light debate is submitted by the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you,
Cape Breton West has the floor.
Mr. Speaker. I want to speak on this issue of insurance and insurance rates, a resolution that we've submitted here on behalf of the Liberal caucus today. Mr. Speaker, I think it's universally shared by all Nova Scotians that the escalating insurance rates in this province are simply unacceptable. Well, Mr. Speaker, if I could, well, yes, Mr. Speaker, when you hear the cat calls from the socialists that don't have no intention of participating in a fruitful debate, then I would ask if perhaps they could just at least be attuned to what's being said, or perhaps find another mission in life that would be less disruptive. Mr. Speaker, because this is a very serious issue. It's a very serious issue, and maybe the NDP like to play politics with the insurance rate by going around and asking people with their postcards if they feel that the insurance rates are too high. Well, you wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist, Mr. Speaker, and use the taxpayers' money and send that around Nova Scotia.
Order, please. No member knows not to use props in the House. No member Cape Breton West has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the question that's being asked by the socialists are, yes, Darrell, I support the NDP task force on lower auto insurance. Nova Scotia drivers deserve a fairer deal. Well, Mr. Speaker, every MLA knows in Nova Scotia we deserve a better deal than what we're getting from the insurance companies. That's in part why the government introduced this piece of legislation. We don't agree that this legislation goes far enough. We don't agree that the government has taken the appropriate action to deal with some of the problems. Mr. Speaker, we know that there'll be only so many more exits for the member for Sackville-Cobequid, so we wish him, Godspeed.
So keep going through.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
thank you, Gerald, for standing up for
this particular piece of legislation that's now before the House of Assembly is essentially the equivalent of closing the barn door after the horse is out. The interest rates and the insurance fees have gone up quite substantially. The cost, Mr. Speaker, well, Mr. Speaker, we want to see where the NDP is going on this. They're determined to have me respond to some of their catcalls. Well, I'll table this document, Mr. Speaker. Here's what an NDP government would do in Nova Scotia, according to the manifesto that they subscribe to. Quote, no CCF government, socialist government, will rest content until it has eradicated capitalism and put into operation the full program of socialized planning which would lead to the establishment in Canada of the cooperative commonwealth. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's the philosophy that the NDP would subscribe to. That's the philosophy that they would try and make the Nova Scotians who are being hurt by the high insurance rates we should commit ourselves to. Mr. Speaker, why don't they come out? Why don't they put it on their website what they really stand for? At least the Liberals and the Tories mark down what their political philosophy is. At least they'll put in writing, they'll put on their website exactly what their manifesto is, unlike the NDP from Nova Scotia, who completely avoid the issue, Mr. Speaker, from A to Z. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because they continually used veiled references to the socialists from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, and you have it. Mr. Speaker, they are so far to the left, that's all they believe in is socialism. They believe in the CCF dogma, which Nova Scotians do not want. But yes, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, the people are not being treated fairly. So we, as a caucus, we subscribe to the fact that we should have had an all-party committee. The NDP said all-party committees don't work. They're a joke. But yet, when there was an opposition government in this House, that's all they called for, day in and day out. Whether it be at the committee level, community services, whether it was on workers' compensation, every day that they came in here, all they wanted was all-party committees because of their desperate grasp for power. That's all it was, Mr. Speaker. And now that that's no longer in sight, they don't want to have anything to do with it, Mr. Speaker. An all-party committee could have achieved a tremendous amount of success over the last 6 months on this issue. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's look, Mr. Speaker, at really what should be done. The rates are too high. We all know they're too high. And the insurance companies have not justified why these substantial rates should be in the offing for the people of Nova Scotia. Some that have received 50, 75, 100, 150% increases over the previous year. Is that acceptable? No, it's not. This simple rubber stamping, as was done in the past for the last near 40 years, going to the Public Utilities and Review Board or its predecessor and saying this is what we're going to increase rates by, and the board would rubber stamp it, that's not acceptable anymore. People want input into it. Mr. Speaker, that's one aspect of it, and that's why we supported that all-party committee. Mr. Speaker, the government appointed Mr. Jordan to be kind of an advocate, a consumer's advocate for input into the process. Well, Mr. Speaker, we support it if the government would only take the gag order off Mr. Jordan. He's not allowed to say anything about this issue to anybody, from anybody, or anything, Mr. Speaker, unless the minister and the cabinet gives him the okay to do that. That's the confidentiality clause. So much for protecting the consumer. Well, that's not protecting the consumer, Mr. Speaker. And the member from Colchester Musquodoboit Valley on a previous day say that we in opposition only wanted to discuss private matters before the House. That's simply not true, and the member knows that, Mr. Speaker. It goes far beyond that. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, a lot of issues can be addressed without having to bring names of individuals before the floor of this legislature without their approbation, as the NDP have been doing for the last 3 years. Never once, Mr. Speaker, in years. It's always been a rule of this House, and the Speaker always ruled that you had to provide some validation of raising people's names in this House. Mr. Speaker, never once did they do that. They use this. They're very carefree with the personal information of citizens of this province, all for the sake of trying to score a few political points. Mr. Speaker, at no point in time was that ever the rule, the precedent, or the custom of this House. But that goes to show you what they'll do, not only on that issue, but the insurance issue and a number of other issues. Mr. Speaker, personally, I think that some of these insurance rates should be rolled back. I think they're too high. It's gouging in the first degree. The government may not be saying anything because it is making an extra $13.5 million in taxes this year over and above the $35 million they collected last year. So now they're going to be up to $48.5 million this year alone in taxes. And yes, as one member has suggested, maybe they're profiteering. Maybe that's why the government has been soft-pedaling this. Now we're in the eve of an election, and what does the government want to do? It has to at least create the optics, the image, the perception that something is being done for the consumers of Nova Scotia. Let's get through an election. Let's implement the Rumsfeld plan. Manage and control your stakeholders. That's the key word, Mr. Speaker. Control your stakeholders. And this is what the government wants to do. And, Mr. Speaker, they seem to be very good at that type of marketeering. But it doesn't address the problem. What about the seniors? As I mentioned last week, one senior whose insurance rates have doubled in 1 year with no accidents all her life. Is she being prosecuted? Is she being punished now, today, simply because she's a senior citizen? Or is it because maybe her car is about 12 or 13 years old? Maybe she can't afford to buy a newer vehicle. And insurance companies are now saying, well, you'll have to pay a higher fee because it's an older vehicle. And it's going to be costing more for us as an insurance company. Maybe the people of Nova Scotia, the citizens, the consumers, should not be punished because these insurance companies don't know how to invest in the marketplace. If they want to take insurance premiums and invest, there should be some type of a security blanket there. If they lose in the marketplace, we as consumers and the people of Nova Scotia should not be punished, Mr. Speaker. We saw what the government of the United States did. They moved to bring in legislation to protect insurance companies. Well, maybe that's the Republican plan. I realize, Mr. Speaker, my time is coming very short. I thank you for the opportunity to introduce this resolution.
Thank you. The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak this evening for a few moments on the resolution that was put forward by the Liberal caucus, and I guess more especially the member for Cape Breton West. He certainly does feel very passionate about this topic. I know there's times when there is a certain amount of, I guess you would call it, rhetoric and a little hyperbole that goes with any given topic, but the member, I think, in this particular instance, especially relative to his comments about the NDP and the NDP caucus, is speaking genuinely from the bottom of his heart. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't think at this particular point, and the honourable member's nodding, and it's quite frequent, I guess, that the honourable member takes the opportunity and sometimes follows the rabbit tracks that lead to some snares that are set. Some snares are big and some small. But the fact of the matter is, we that believe in the capitalistic society do have some difficulty. Well, no, quite frankly, you know, we may be called socializers, but never can they label us as socialists, Mr. Speaker. You know, just this afternoon, the honourable member for Halifax Fairview was standing on his feet and talking about how the Tory government was more concerned about some big corporate business person in the executive of an insurance company in Holland walking down the street smoking a cigar and drinking the finest liquor, whatever the case might be, and used some very strong language. I think it was regarding the fact he was allegedly swilling some type of drink and smoking these big cigars, and in all the Halifax Fairview members' sanctimonious splendor and in his demented lust to criticize the government, Mr. Speaker, he forgot to mention that the NDP, in spite of their efforts, and I do somewhat backhandedly commend the NDP for coming forward and going out and meeting with Nova Scotians and listening to the concerns that Nova Scotia have about automobile insurance rates. And Lord knows we all hear concerns from constituents. You don't have to reside in an NDP riding to hear concerns about automobile insurance rates, or you don't have to reside or live in a Tory riding or a Liberal riding to hear these concerns. These concerns are provincial in nature, and that's why this government decided to take a look at this concern. And yes, Mr. Speaker, many members in this House opposite, in fact, in both caucuses, agree that, in fact, it's a step in the right direction, but it's not really big enough step. Is that not what members opposite are saying, irrespective of our philosophical views? And I have to agree, the member for Cape Breton West clearly articulated the views that some of us have regarding the NDP's sanctimonious approach to no matter what the topic is. They get up on the soapbox, and they criticize the poor beleaguered worker here. Not too long ago, and I was really surprised and quite disappointed that the member for Hants East, of all members in that caucus, was to stand in his place and acknowledge that, well, somebody that makes $15,000, $16,000, $17,000, maybe $18,000 doesn't pay provincial income tax. And if they do, they would somehow grudgingly accept this $155 rebate, Mr. Speaker. Now, you know, that's an insult to the people of Nova Scotia's intelligent, Mr. Speaker, because anybody that's earning $15,000, $16,000, $17,000, and $18,000 is struggling to pay those insurance premiums. So how can you stand, or in the case of the member for Dartmouth North, sit in your place and criticize the working poor in this province and say they don't deserve that $155 rebate? I'm very, very disappointed that the NDP caucus and the member for Dartmouth North would be against that poor, beleaguered, working poor person in Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, or in Hants East, or in Dartmouth North, or in Halifax, Shabak, or in Sackville, Cobequid, receiving a check for $155. The audacity, the temerity of that caucus, and that speaks, and that speaks through the Speaker to the member of Cape Breton West. That speaks to that philosophy, that socialist philosophy, that those poor people in Nova Scotia don't deserve a break. My goodness, it's a shame. It's a shame. That caucus in its entirety should hang its head in shame. Stand up and apologize to Nova Scotians. Stand up and apologize to Nova Scotians. It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. You know, they talk about cigar smoking and liqueur drinking, but you know, in their sanctimonious splendor, in their demented haste to berate all other members in this legislature, they forget that there is working poor people out in Nova Scotia, people that pay income tax, Mr. Speaker. And some people refer perhaps to the NDP. And Mr. Speaker, don't you ever forget that the working poor, the people that are working in Nova Scotia, deserve a tax break. Our Premier and this government made a promise to provide a tax rebate, and we're going to follow through, Mr. Speaker. We're going to follow through on the promise we made. So, you know, over the past year, the government's been working hard, and it's not just as simple. And I think the member for Cape Breton West may agree in the Liberal caucus that you just can't pull out of that light bulb an answer to the problem with insurance. And let's not think that it's just only automobile insurance that Nova Scotians are concerned about. They're concerned about home insurance. They're concerned about all kinds of insurance, Mr. Speaker, you know. And we'd like to bring, as a government, and I'm sure all members in this House, even the NDP caucus, would probably like to bring stability to the insurance, especially the auto insurance market. But you know, Mr. Speaker, you know what I heard this afternoon? I heard the member from Halifax Fairview stand in his place and try to take credit. He was more interested in one-upmanship than actually doing something positive and concrete for Nova Scotia consumers. You know, he was saying, well, it was the NDP that brought this to the forefront. It was the NDP that did this, and we wanted it referred to the Utility Review Board. But you know what? It was the All-Party Economic Development Committee. It was the All-Party Economic Development Committee that brought Mr. Forgeron and his ilk over to the Economic Development Committee. It wasn't the NDP, and go back and do the chronology. Go back and study the chronology, and you'll find out that the Liberals, the Progressive Conservatives, and the NDP on that committee brought in the insurance industry, the insurance bureau. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, instead of standing in their place and trying to take all this credit, why don't they try to come up with practical solutions? Why don't they come up with some solution? You know, they said, oh, no, it's no good to come out and appoint a consumer advocate. You know, that doesn't help a thing. You know, we're opposed to that. That's no good. That's too little, too late. Oh, there must be an election coming. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've been around here for nearly a decade. Sometimes I know, Mr. Speaker, we forget how quickly time goes by when we're having fun and enjoying representing our people. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, I think every member in this legislature, irrespective of what political stripe they wear, is in here for the best interest of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. So don't try to tell us, oh, you know, so what? Yes, normally, except, I guess, during one government's term, I think it was from 93 through until 98, they probably went the full 5 years. And, Mr. Speaker, and even during the Buchanan-Cameron regime, the last tenure that they served as government, they went the 5 years. But the fact of the matter is, most governments, I think, conventional wisdom will tell you, and the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova, I think, might agree, that you go every 4 years. So obviously, I think we all know that there may be an election called this year. In fact, the Premier said there was going to be election. So just because, you bring in legislation that reflects concerns, perhaps not all the concerns that the NDP caucus would like addressed, or not all the concerns that the Tories or the Liberals would like addressed, just because it comes forward doesn't automatically mean that, oh, well, they're just doing that because we brought it. No, what's it nothing to do with the Liberals or the Tories? The only party, the Socialists are the only party that cares. Can you believe that, Mr. Speaker? The only party that cares for Nova Scotians is well, that's absolutely preposterous. It's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. And why don't you come up with practical solutions? Stand in your place and speak to solutions and try to provide good government for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. You've never had the opportunity. You probably will never get the opportunity because all you want to do is sit back like a pack of wolves. And I use that figure of speech figuratively, I heard the honourable member talk about throwing something into the dog. So, they just want to sit back. I would say more like, how would you say, scavengers, then we would say, waiting to come in. Oh my gosh, here's an area where we'll hit them quick. They haven't got a solution right now. We'll hit them with insurance rate. We'll hit them with nursing home. We'll try to do this. We'll try to do that. But you know what? The fact of the matter is our government's listening to all Nova Scotians, irrespective of political stripe, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member Halifax Shabakto.
I begin to understand, Mr. Speaker, why it's often referred to as the late show. It's not a competition that is the competition of volume in which I intend to engage this afternoon. I'll try and stick to the resolution that's in front of us. There seem to be two parts to the resolution. One, of course, is the hardcore issue of the increase in automobile insurance rates that so many Nova Scotians have encountered. The other part, of course, is a question of credit, of political credit, and the question of whether the actions of the present government are adequate to deal with the problem. Two parts to the resolution. Straightforward and worth having a look at. The fact seems to be that in the spring of 2001, fully 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, the insurance industry in Nova Scotia began to give advance warning to all of us that they anticipated a big increase in premiums. They knew that it was going to occur. And they began to state publicly at that time that was going to be the case. Although they started out with private briefings, I think, for the political parties and for those who were involved in the insurance industry, particularly the brokers. And over the ensuing months, Nova Scotians indeed encountered what was predicted by the insurance industry in Canada. They knew it was coming because they had control, and they do have control, continue to have control, over the level of premiums that are charged to the customers. It was in the fall of that year that we began to hear in our caucus complaints from Nova Scotians about the increasing rates. And promptly after hearing a number of these complaints in January of 2002, well over a year ago, several MLAs in our caucus, my colleague for Eastern Passage, my colleague for Cape Breton Centre, spoke about referring the matter to the Utility and Review Board. In fact, they wrote to the Utility and Review Board and they called publicly for formal hearings into the increasing rates. Let's be clear what the power of the Utility and Review Board is in Nova Scotia. It doesn't have the power to veto in advance the rates. It only has the power to step in after rates are being proposed and in fact put in place by the companies to determine retroactively whether the rates are reasonable and whether they ought to be modified, and only then after hearings. The initial response of the government to the suggestion that there be full-scale hearings by the Utility and Review Board was to say no. The response was to say that it wasn't necessary. The response was to leave it to the interaction in the private market. The hope was apparently that competition among the insurers would work out the problems. It very quickly became evident, however, that this was not the case. It very quickly became evident that there was a huge amount of concern among the public. And therefore, within a 2 to 3 week period, the minister who was at that time responsible for insurance matters agreed to refer the matter to formal hearings at the Utility and Review Board. But the leisureliness of this has been amazing. That was at the very beginning of February of 2002, and the hearings didn't start until September, and we still don't have a report from the Utility and Review Board, and this is well over a year later. So this matter is proceeding at a very slow pace, and it's only now that the government is stepping in with anything that looks like an attempt to try to deal with the rates. Now, let's look briefly at the justifications that the insurance companies are offering for their increases in rates. They say two things, and two things only, really. One is they say that their payouts are higher than the amount they take in premiums. The second thing they say is really an elaboration of that first point, because they're trying to explain it. They say the reason their payouts are higher is because of soft tissue injuries and the amounts that the courts award. Well, let's look at the first point, this question about the bare fact that their payouts are higher than the premiums. I quoted this passage on a previous occasion, and it's been tabled, Mr. Speaker, so I don't think I need to table it again, but I looked at the Federal Department of Finance's website, in which they describe the financial institutions in Canada, the banks, the trust companies, the insurance companies, the stock brokerages. And when you read what they say about the insurance companies, here's what they say, because they describe profitability and investment by the companies. And I'm now going to quote, "As in other countries, such as the US, P&C insurance activities in Canada normally result in underwriting losses for most major product lines. This means that premiums paid for policies each year do not generate enough revenue to cover outgoing claims and expenses. However, these underwriting losses are normally more than offset by the investment income generated from assets held by the industry." End of quote. The key word there is that this is the normal practice. Normally, it's the usual thing for property and casualty insurers, of which automobile insurers are the largest portion, not to take in more in premiums than they pay out in claims. That's just the way they do business. As the Department of Finance says, they make their money from their investments. That's where they make money. So the only logical conclusion is that they've lost money on the stock markets, and of course we know this. We know this from their own industry publications. Now, the justification, the secondary justification they offer, is that soft tissue claims are driven way up. If there is any part of the world where that might be true, it might be the United States, where very large claims are sometimes awarded by juries. It certainly isn't true in Canada, and it is especially not true here in Nova Scotia. Any lawyer who has practiced in this area of the law in Nova Scotia knows that the claims awards from courts are exceptionally low in Nova Scotia. Shockingly low, I would say. Inappropriately low, I would say. That is not the problem here. End of story, so far as it comes to the insurance industry. They're wrong, we're right. Now, what about the freeze? Is the freeze an adequate measure? Well, it isn't, and here's why. It's easy to follow, very simple steps. We'll elaborate this in second reading debate. But the first thing, of course, is that it ends, the freeze is temporary, it ends in 2004, and the insurance companies will be able to step in there and increase their rates even more at that point and say, we need this to make up for the lost increases from last year that we didn't get. Second is that it does nothing, absolutely nothing, about the big increases that are already in place over the last 2 years since they told us in the spring of 2001 the rates were going to go up, and those increases have been enormous. For many people, hundreds of dollars, for some people, multiples of their insurance. This is just not tolerable. The other thing the freeze doesn't do is it does nothing about the unfairness categories. It does absolutely nothing about discrimination on basis of age or place of residence or on payment records or on relation to minor infractions, minor driving infractions, nothing at all. It doesn't regulate the industry when it comes to them determining who's the major driver of the car, none of that. Furthermore, the freeze is a complete illusion because there are entirely too many ways to avoid it. The most obvious way in which the companies can go around the so-called freeze is on the basis that for every 12 months that go by, your car is going to be a year older. So at that point, never mind that there's a freeze in rate for what your car might have paid last year. Now they can apparently legitimately say, well, your car's a year older. It's in a different category. The rate for that hasn't gone up because of the freeze, but now you're in a different category. The car's gone up. Or for every 12 months that goes by, you're going to get a little older as well. And if you happen to tip over into the other age category and you're into one of the categories for pre-existing increased rates, then you're in trouble. There are innumerable ways for the companies to get round the freeze. So in the end, it's completely illusory. Well, what are we left with when we look at this resolution? What we look at is that on both scores, the question of the companies and the question of political credit, we have to conclude that the companies are wrong and that indeed that the members of this party were right in bringing this issue forward as forcefully as we have. We've been very gratified to find such a strong reaction from the public, and it is clear to us that the reaction of this government is motivated by nothing except the forthcoming election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time has expired on the late debate. The revert now to Bill number 45. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, prior to the adjournment debate, I was speaking on this bill, and we were developing some themes, which I now propose to develop somewhat further. We were saying that the Liberal Party made this an issue about 2 years ago, proposed then an all-party standing committee of the House that would look into insurance, come up with solutions, and bring them back here. I was also mentioning that in the province of New Brunswick, that was done. As a result, we have here the report of the Committee on Insurance in the New Brunswick Legislature, which I would like to table. I don't propose to read it. It's 55 pages in length. There's one copy for the table, one copy for the NDP, and one copy for the Tories. 3 copies. How many trees have I chopped down today, Mr. Speaker? Unfortunately, I haven't done any today, but I got enough calluses on my hands to show I do it pretty often. Now, going back to the bill, I want to say this, that had we done what the Liberals invited all of us to do 2 years ago, we would have a similar report now that could be tabled as a guide for this government to follow. 56 pages, read them, my friend, and then you'll know. I only have an hour to speak. You want me to speak for 54 hours. That's like the government endorsing or carrying out the Dorsey report. 54 years. I haven't got that kind of time tonight. I've only got 1 hour. So let me get back to my speech. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was saying that in New Brunswick, they did this under a Tory government, Bernard Lord. And the outcome, time will tell, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I know that New Brunswick took the step that the Liberals here in Nova Scotia recommended here. And the reason we didn't do it here was because of those two, Mr. Speaker, the NDP-PC alliance, working together against the people. Now, lately, the NDP have developed new interest in this subject because they think that there's an election coming. And I think we can all agree that there's an election coming. Therefore, the new NDP interest in insurance. And the NDP have put out a flyer, a pamphlet. I don't know if it's gone into every mailbox in the province or not, but I have here photostat reproductions of the front and of the back of the NDP pamphlet to table, so that we can all see what it is that I'm talking about if you didn't find it already in your mailbox and throw it into the waste paper can already. Now, what does the NDP pamphlet say? It says on the front, there's no good reason why Nova Scotians pay more for car insurance. But the NDP, Mr. Speaker, are wrong because they fail to look into the mirror and look at themselves. That's why Nova Scotians are paying more for car insurance, Mr. Speaker, because of the NDP. That's why. Because they rejected any idea for a compromised, all-party, peaceful, working together solution. They said, no, no, we can't have that. So that's why Nova Scotians are paying more for car insurance. Now, Mr. Speaker, I see the member for Dartmouth North is not happy with what I'm saying. He can certainly get up and take his turn in the debate. But there was a tear-off postcard section to the NDP flyer. Postage paid, yes. This is their idea of consulting with the people. I know that they've criticized the Conservatives for appointing a person to consult with the people on the matter of insurance. They say, no, no, still not enough. What is their idea of consultation with the people? It is to fill out this wee little form here, Mr. Speaker. That's life-size, about 3 inches across. And the heading is, yes, Darrell, count me in. I support the NDP task force on lower auto insurance. Nova Scotia drivers deserve a fair deal! Exclamation mark. I think auto insurance rates in Nova Scotia are fair. Yes or no? Well, those that responded, I would think, would probably say no. You get your turn in the debate. Take it. Now, the second point is, I think the Nova Scotia government should take action to lower auto insurance rates. Yes or no? Tick a box. That's point 2. And there's also point 3, Mr. Chairman. We must move on to point 3. Point 3 is, let me get my glasses on so I can see it. Do you agree that today's families deserve the lowest and fairest auto insurance rates? Yes or no? Tick a box.
Order.
Is that a point of order?
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Finance on the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the learned member has served in this House for many years, and he has indicated that he won't be reoffering. And I want to thank you very much, because obviously I would never have had that information, because in Argyll, the NDP wouldn't waste their money to send it to each household. So I want to thank the member most sincerely for sharing that information with me.
On the point of order, the Honourable Member of Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I have another copy of all this front and back for the Minister of Finance. Take that over to him for weekend reading. Now, let's carry on with the NDP questionnaire as an illustration, Mr. Speaker, of their commitment, their level of commitment to consultation with the people on this issue that this bill deals with. Because underneath all that, they have a section headed comments. And underneath comments, they have not 1, not 2, but 3 little lines, each 3 inches long and about a 1/16 of an inch apart, so that there's probably enough room to write in, yes, Darrell, as an answer. That's all the space they provide. Now, underneath all that, they have NDP, Darrell Dexter, and a great big smiling face, looking something like the big bad wolf in the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Anyway, that's the NDP idea of consulting with the people. We see it from the evidence. I don't need to, resort to any cumbersome proofs of this. It's right here in their own flyer. The amount of space they allow for a response from the people is about that big. So much for their commitment to the people. Now, they say they want to tell us about the response of the people. My question is, have they told the people the whole truth? Have they told the people the whole truth about their own party? Because I did some research recently and I came off the internet with this copy of the Regina Manifesto. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Nova Scotia would love to know what the Regina Manifesto says. Because the Regina Manifesto, sit down, please. The Regina Manifesto.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. No. No member for Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
No, it's on. It's on. But let me just read the concluding paragraph of the Regina Manifesto so you can get the flavor of the document, Mr. Speaker. because it says no CCF government, I know this by memory, I shouldn't have to read it. No CCF government will rest content until it has eradicated capitalism and put into operation the full program of socialized planning which will lead to the establishment in Canada of the cooperative commonwealth, which means the socialist state. That's what the Regina Manifesto says, which is their foundation document. They would not exist as a party if there wasn't the Regina Manifesto.
Order, please. Y'all member Sackville Cobequid, point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. My point of order, Mr. Speaker, is to the member. It seems to me that he was a member of the party around that time and that he was a strong advocate of that principle, which, of course, is no longer a principle that we are talking about here today, Mr. Speaker. But I think that the member should come clean about how he was able to purge that thought from his mind, and why it is that he knows that quote off by heart, Mr. Speaker, if he wasn't spoting it as his principle.
On a point of order, the honourable member Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I detect that perhaps the honourable member is confessing his sins and admitting that they have rejected their founding principles. They have no principles, therefore I should conclude. Mr. Speaker, it is not my intention on the debate on this bill to get into the Regina Manifesto point by point, line by line. But I do think that all voters who want to see this document in context should read the Regina Manifesto to get the whole picture. That's my point. Now, I was talking before about the New Brunswick Committee on Auto Insurance and the report that they tabled, and how that could have been done here but wasn't because of the NDP. Therefore, we have this bill before us. That's where I'm coming from, Mr. Speaker. That's how all this relates to the bill now under discussion. This is the alternative to the Liberal solution of an all-party conference and committee, rather, an all-party committee that could have looked at this matter in depth over the past 2 years and by now have arrived at a solution similar to what was done in the province of New Brunswick. That's perhaps not a very profound point, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I don't need to go into Saskatchewan to illustrate it, but I think it is rather self-evident to those who want to see the point. Now, instead, we're here. Instead, we're considering this bill. This bill reminds me, Mr. Speaker, of the Cape Breton Railroad, the Cape Breton and Central Nova Scotia Railroad problem. Because on that issue also, they came up with a short-term solution. They deferred action for 2 years. The railway was going to close. It would have been closed by now from Port Hawkesbury up to Sydney. That was what they were faced with. They took action that means that will not now be faced until the year 2005. And they pat themselves on the back and say, what a good job we've done. And the NDP pat them on the back and say, what a good job we've done. They both say the same thing together, that they solved the railroad problem. Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's been solved. I hope it has been. I'm wishing them good luck in spite of themselves. But I don't think that a 2-year deferral is going to solve the railway problem any more than this bill is going to solve the insurance problem. Because it's simply putting a time deadline on the insurance companies. It's not telling them they can't maximize their profits. It's not telling them they can't gouge the consumer. It's not telling them that they can strike all kinds of different carriers, such as pizza drivers or taxis or ambulances or whatever they want, off the list of vehicles to be insured. It doesn't say any of those things. It says, but you can't do it until Thursday. That's what it says. Now, they want us to stand up and applaud them too and say what good boys and girls you are, and yes, we'll vote for your nice bill and send it down to law amendments, and we hope it comes back as soon as possible so we can put the big rubber stamp on it and off you go to the polls. Well, I don't know why they should expect undeserved cooperation on that kind of proposition.
You don't think that this is something to do with the election, do you?
I do think.
Oh, I do too. We agree.
All right. Now, that's what you call a comment made in passing. Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to lecture the House for an hour on the Regina Manifesto. They want more. I don't intend to lecture any more than I have on this pamphlet, because enough is enough with respect to that pamphlet, although you can be sure that they have another one coming out next week, posing now as champions of something else, maybe of Sunday shopping, or maybe of whatever new cause it is that they think the wind is blowing that particular way. As my good friend, the Honourable Member for Cape Breton South says, the flavour of the day for the NDP. Whatever the flavour of the day is, they take it up until they forget it for a new one tomorrow. Yeah, well, that kind of political opportunism, Mr. Speaker, makes me believe that the NDP realize that they find themselves politically boxed in as we come into the upcoming election. They have 10 seats now. There are at least 2 of them, I think, that they can safely expect to lose. And their question is, can they hold the 8, or will it be down to 7, or down to 6, or down to 5, or down to 3, or down to 1? That is the issue that faces the New Democratic Party going into this election. And why? Because of the way, Mr. Speaker, in which they have manipulated the system, the political system, to their own perceived short-term advantage, but to the overall detriment of the public good of the people of this province. That's the price you have to pay. When you paint yourself into a corner, the corner gets mighty small as you continue to apply the paint. Now, how's Graham going to do in Halifax Fairview? He wants a seat-by-seat projection. Well, I don't know, but I was talking to the Liberal candidate in Timberley Prospect the other day, and he wasn't so sure that the Honourable Member who now represents that riding would continue to. I leave that to the people. Let them decide. Let them decide these types of questions. I don't give a riding-by-riding prediction, except to say I should think that... Who's that? I don't know what he's referring to, Mr. Speaker. I didn't catch it. But I will say this, that all 3 parties will put up their candidates and the people will decide who the winner is, seat by seat and on the overall. And that's how our democratic system works. And I'm sure you don't want to hear a half-an-hour lecture on democracy. Well... Let me say a few words about insurance. They think I know nothing about insurance. That's always been the NDP outlook towards me. They tried to defeat me at the polls 6 times, and the way they came with their deposit lost, I think 4 of the 6 times. But anyway, let me say this, Mr. Speaker. There's no, or at least few would debate or take issue with the fact that I have worked very hard and long on workers' compensation. And I don't mean just on individual cases. I mean on the system as a whole. I was on select committees that this House appointed to examine workers' compensation, not once but several times. I was a supporter of reform legislation, such as the one we passed last fall. Everyone knows that, you know. Workers' compensation is an insurance plan. Now, those who think I know nothing about insurance should examine the evidence in terms of my long-time commitment to not just winning individual workers' compensation cases, but protecting the overall system as a whole so that it would continue to be there to protect the workers of Nova Scotia. You know? But in a similar sense, Mr. Speaker, I've taken a good deal of interest in many insurance cases involving automobile accidents and in the fire insurance claims that sometimes get rejected, and people will come to someone like me saying, can you help us? Because while the insurance industry is private, it is under government supervision and control. There's an inspector, an insurance inspector, superintendent, is the proper word, superintendent of insurance, to whom all insurance companies in this province have to answer. And the government licenses all insurance companies to do business in Nova Scotia. It is therefore an area that is a legitimate subject for concern and interest and involvement by any member of this House that wishes to. And I think that in that sense, I've taken as much of an interest in the subject, if not more, than many members of this House have.
Especially on that side.
We have interruptions from, I was going to say Colonel Sanders, but I'm not permitted to, so I won't. I'll be quiet. Now, well, maybe he's gotten better since those days. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I think the bottom line is that the bill is not what we had hoped for. We in this party had called for something that we thought was better and still do. Now, some have called attention to the fact that they want to know what the Liberal Party policy is on insurance. I want to tell you this, Mr. Speaker, and I think you'll agree with me, that there is an election coming. And in the course of that election campaign, there will be an election platform released by every party in this House. And we will see, when we read it, what the insurance position of the Liberal Party is versus those of the NDP and the PCs. But I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that in a very real way, this bill sums up what the PC position on insurance is. It's the same tack that they took to the Cape Breton Railway. Defer action. Don't move now. Let it happen later. As they say in Spanish, mañana, tomorrow, not now. So with that, is that correct, Mark? My pronunciation on that Spanish word? Yes. Mañana? Oui. Si. All right. Now, this is their platform. Therefore, I guess we're going to have to vote on it. Are we going to vote yes? Are we going to vote si? Or are we going to vote no? No. No. How do you say no? No. No. All right. We have that choice. We have that choice. I think that you will find members on this side of the House rather not inclined to want to vote, at least this side of the House. I don't know about those people. They may be jumping up and down with joy, you know, but we'll leave it to them. All right, you said it more than I did. You said it better than I did. All right. There you...
People in Nova Scotia, we did it.
All right. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was asked to speak until the hour of 7 o'clock. It may be rather difficult to do because I do believe in that rule in our rule book against repetition. And I don't want to have to say the same things over and over again. That was a great habit of Joey Smallwood, thinking that if an audience didn't capture the message the first time, you should repeat it again, and then again, and then again. And finally, the people said, yes, we will vote for Confederation, since you said it 8 times in a row.
So go back to the Regina Manifesto.
But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that there is good reason to be less than enthused about this bill as a long-term solution. In fact, it's not a long-term solution at all. It's a temporary solution, a transitory solution, one that quickly goes away like a mirage. And in terms of an answer, I don't think they found the answer here at all. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I suggest that this bill is a confession that they haven't, that really they don't know what to do. But they do want to get reelected, they know that. And they hope that this bill will make the problem, the menace of insurance rates out of control seem not immediate, seem like something down the road. And therefore, that and the $155 check, they hope, will get them through this time round. So, a piece of cake, they think, now that they've thought this one out. It doesn't meet any long-term public need. It only meets their short-term need to get reelected. And based on that, I don't really think that I should be sending them a $5 or $10 check to encourage them. I think that's enough for now, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable members for Sackville-Cobequid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak for a few minutes this evening following my friend from Cape Breton Nova. And Mr. Speaker, I won't get into the Regina Manifesto tonight. Mr. Speaker, the member who just spoke was one who is more familiar than I on that particular topic and had preceded me in support and therefore was closer to the time of that, Mr. Speaker. So I won't get into that. But I do want to say that with a few items that he did say, that I'm in full agreement with him. A few of the items. And the main thing that I want to say that I agree with him on, Mr. Speaker, is that he is very insightful into the obvious. And the obvious, Mr. Speaker, is that what we have before us today for debate is a bill that was introduced by what I call the Tory, or the health minister for Tories, Mr. Speaker. And I say that the minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates is the health minister for the Tories, is because what he is attempting to do is to inoculate the Tories against what they know is a very volatile public issue. And Mr. Speaker, the legislation that is before us is something that was in a very hurried manner, behind a veil of secrecy in the Premier's bunker, crafted, I'm sure, by the moguls who are planning the election campaign, aimed at trying to deflect criticism away from this government for their years of inaction, leaving Nova Scotians vulnerable to the gouging, and I say gouging without any hesitation whatsoever, being done of today's families here in Nova Scotia and today's businesses here in Nova Scotia by the insurance industry. Now, Mr. Speaker, when my leader raises questions, when he raises questions of the government House Leader, minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, he gets some warm fuzzies thrown back at him. He's called things like, what was it he was called today? Was it a sniveling whiner? Whining and sniveling. So, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the official opposition, it is the government's view, obviously, that people who are bringing forward concerns about skyrocketing insurance rates, which are meaning that many families are not able to maintain their insurance on their vehicles, who have every right to be upset, those who complain about the skyrocketing and unjustified insurance rates are accused of being whiners and snivelers. And I want all Nova Scotians, not only those who have returned the cards. Mr. Speaker, many Nova Scotians haven't seen those cards, but are still upset about insurance rates. Go into any coffee shop, go anywhere and start up a conversation with anybody. Don't raise the issue yourself, but see how long it takes them. Nova Scotia families, see how long it takes them to raise with you, especially, Mr. Speaker, if they know you're a politician. See how long it takes them to raise the insurance rate issue with you. Now, the brain trust behind the bunker crowd, behind the veil of secrecy, that bunker crowd, that brain trust must have done some polling. They may even have done some focus groups, and they said, what are those hot button issues out there that could bring the government down, cost members of the Tory benches their precious seats? You know, Mr. Speaker, they, in a very half-hearted approach, tried to deflect or tried to dampen the whole issue about long-term care health costs. And the Minister of Health and the Premier like to brag about, oh, we're going to do something before the next election 4 years away. And now, Mr. Speaker, lo and behold, they have finally discovered it's to their political advantage, they hope, to try to address an issue that this caucus has been trying to get addressed for years. And, Mr. Speaker, this government finally, a month after they had refused to refer the matter of the insurance rates to the Utility Review Board. A month after they refused to do it, lo and behold, they must have had some kind of vision. Probably came from a pollster, because this government is certainly out of touch with Nova Scotia families and what's affecting them in their daily lives. Some pollster must have given them a result that said, whoops, insurance rates are an issue, so we better do something about it. And so, Mr. Speaker, the government, on a very principled move, did the flip and decided to follow the advice given to them by our caucus. However, Mr. Speaker, even though they did that, and they finally did refer the matter to the Utility Review Board, the government was unprepared to go forward with the measures to roll them back. And now we got a bill. The government likes to say this is to create a timeout period, a time of calm, to give the insurance company a few moments to think about their bad behavior. So it's like the classroom. The government is saying, what we will do is we will stand you in the corner for a few months, chilling time. Chilling time until after the election. The bill that is before us, and Mr. Speaker, I say at the beginning, I will vote for it. Not because the bill is a good bill, but I anticipate I will vote for this, I should say. Because you know, Mr. Speaker, if I was dying of thirst and somebody offered me a thimble of water, I'd take it. I'd take that thimble of water. And what the government is offering here is a thimble of hope. They're not doing their job unless you consider trying to hoodwink Nova Scotians is their job. You know, we listen to and we hear all the time from Don Forgeron. Going out and talking about all the reasons why the rates have to go up. Now, let's face it, Mr. Speaker, he's a mouthpiece for the insurance industry. Yeah. He is a paid lobbyist. His job is to go out and to sell the big insurance industry's message. That's his job. And, Mr. Speaker, he does it very well. He does it with a straight face. Just like the minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates and the premier, Mr. Speaker, when they announced that this was being done, and I watched the interviews, and they said that this is being done not because of any election, it's just because we thought it needed to be done. They said that with a straight face. Didn't crack, well, the minister cracked a little bit of a smile. But, Mr. Speaker, come on. Do you think that Nova Scotians believe for 1 minute that this bill that is before us now has nothing to do with the election that is likely to be called not this weekend but the following weekend? The minister said that he's expecting an interim report on insurance from Mr. Jordan in June. And he said if the House isn't sitting, of course he knows it isn't going to be, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how. I mean, you know, I've been accused of the past of being a filibuster and using certainly every ample opportunity or every opportunity I had on the floor of the House to maximize the amount of time that I spent speaking. But I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, it would take some magician and a whole new rule book with the agenda that this government has brought forward as they head to the polls to keep this House in session for many more weeks. So, Mr. Speaker, there isn't a chance, not any possibility, that this House would be in session then. And then, Mr. Speaker, the minister went on to say, well, if the House isn't in session, I'll table the report with the clerk. Table it with the House through the clerk. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, if, as most of us suspect, and you know, I've even heard reports that some Tories are out there renting campaign headquarters. That might be a clue that something is coming. Might be a bit of a clue. You know, Mr. Speaker, if the election is called, the House is prorogued. So you can't table the report with the legislature that doesn't exist, because there is no effect government. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, the way that I think that it would be tabled, if there is any such thing as a tabling being done, is some kind of statement by a gentleman who is currently the Premier. He'll probably have a backdrop behind him. And, Mr. Speaker, since whatever report is coming back has to be ferreted through the government, you can be sure that there will be a certain political spin put on it. What Nova Scotians want, what Nova Scotia families need, what Nova Scotia families deserve, what Nova Scotia businesses need and deserve and expect this government to deliver are the lowest and fairest possible insurance rates. And I suggest to the member from Queens, to the member from Bedford, the member from Kings South, Kings North, from Shelburne, from Guysborough, Port Hawkesbury, from Halifax, Bedford Basin, from Truro, from Cumberland County, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest, no matter where you live in this province, Nova Scotians expect that their government will be working for them rather than for the shareholders of the multinational insurance companies, most of whom are located south of the border, Mr. Speaker. They expect to have you working for them to ensure that they pay fair insurance rates and rates, Mr. Speaker, that are the lowest possible. Now, this, as I said, bill has nothing to do with trying to really improve the lot of Nova Scotia families and Nova Scotia businesses, but everything to do to try to improve the political fortunes, to protect the hindquarters of those members who want to continue to occupy the government benches. That's what this is all about. Hopefully, I'm making myself clear, because I wouldn't want to have to repeat myself on that. Now, Mr. Speaker, if this government, I think some Tory members over there aren't obeying the instructions that they've been given, because they've been ordered not to heckle. Oh, they're going to be in trouble. They're going to be in trouble. They're going to get their knuckles rapped, because, some of them over there are showing some expression and some life. Oh, they breathe, Mr. Speaker. Even the member from Yarmouth, Mr. Speaker, has come to life. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the people in Yarmouth depend on the automobile in many ways far more than I do, or people in the urban communities. Because, Mr. Speaker, and he says that they are counting on their member to represent them, Mr. Speaker. And yes, indeed, they are, and they're waiting for that day to finally come. And, Mr. Speaker, they're waiting for that. And I look forward to the member from Yarmouth getting to his feet and bringing to this House the concerns of the residents of Yarmouth about the... I'm trying to think of the right word, Mr. Speaker, and still stay within the rules. Let me just say the obscene rates that the insurance industries are charging the residents down in that area. Mr. Speaker, you know, Mr. Speaker, Yarmouth Clayton Park, that's it, yes, okay. Anyway, I won't go there, Mr. Speaker. I did get that. But you know, Mr. Speaker, if the government truly had been concerned over a year ago, when they first knew or got the scent that this could become a political issue that could hurt them, and they finally referred the matter to the Utility and Review Board the end of February 2002. You know what they could have done? And you know what it would have meant, Mr. Speaker? It would have meant that the residents of Yarmouth would be paying approximately 65% lower insurance rates than they are today, as would the residents in Truro, in Kings North. But I'm sure we'll be told that this is a socially responsible measure, Mr. Speaker, that the rates went up by 65% by the member from Kings North. The rates, Mr. Speaker, if the government had wanted to, would have been frozen when it was sent to the Utility Review Board for approval. Over a year ago. Over a year ago. They would have been frozen. And Nova Scotians, and the Tories, Mr. Speaker, you know what? In hindsight, they probably wish they had have, because then they wouldn't be facing this political crisis. It wouldn't be a crisis for them as they go to the polls, because, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians would be happy because they wouldn't have had to pay 65% more average increases, Mr. Speaker. And so that wouldn't have been a political crisis for the Tories that now they have to try to undo. And they could have put in place programs and procedures to ensure that Nova Scotians were not going to be gouged. What is the government doing to try to get the insurance company to be responsible? They have delayed. They haven't frozen, they have delayed insurance increases. You know, I had a constituent call my office this morning about insurance. And Mr. Speaker, her insurance rate is supposed to go up in June by approximately 25%. I think I'm trying to remember the exact figures. It's going up from a little over $1,900, $1,900, might have been $1,990, but above $1,900, but less than $2,000, to just shy of $27,000. So either closer to $600 or $700, and I don't have the actual details for me, but it was $600 to $700 increase. And she wanted to know, will this stop it? Will this protect me from that insurance rate increase? And Mr. Speaker, I had to tell her, I'm sorry, no. She will still face that insurance rate increase. Do you know why, Mr. Speaker? Because her insurance company had put her before into facility insurance. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this bill does not affect all of those who are in facility insurance, and the insurance companies have been driving all kinds of people into facility insurance. It's up by what, about 300%? About 300%. The insurer of last resort. The expensive insurance. The ones where the bigger bucks are made. And you don't have to be a bad driver to get put into that, Mr. Speaker. If you try to get a policy and you don't have a current insurer, Mr. Speaker, just guess where they're going to put you. It's facility insurance. We in this House correctly take tremendous pride in our women and men who serve in the military. And we have every reason to be proud of the sacrifices that they are making on our behalf. And I see the member from Colchester Musquodoboit giving an applause to that statement. And Mr. Speaker, I wonder if he also knows that those who are off serving our country in the war against terrorism on the ships offshore, if they have been away for 6 or 7 months, as many of them have been, a logical thing to do, one thing I certainly would have done if I was a driver and the only driver of that vehicle, I would have taken my insurance off for that period of time and plunked my car in the driveway. And you don't want to do that. Because you know what happens. And I see the member from Colchester Musquodoboit Valley nodding his head. You come back, you've had interrupted insurance, and let me tell you, the insurance companies say, oh, we love to see you because your rates have just gone through the roof. You're back to being basically a new driver and facing facility insurance.
That's fair. It's a good way to treat our soldiers.
That's a wonderful way to treat our women and men who serve this country so faithfully, putting their lives at risk on our behalf. Does the government do anything about that? No. Heard the minister during one of his interviews outside. Media asked him some, what I thought were very common sense questions. Like the legislation that is before us. Are the regulations that would go along with it, are they prepared? The minister took a respectful pause, trying to think. You could see the cogs going, now what do I say to this? And he said, Mr. Speaker, and I'm paraphrasing him here, I didn't have a tape running, but he can correct me if basically what I'm saying is wrong, my paraphrasing. He said, well, staff have a pretty good idea of what kind of regulations would be needed. So staff, presumably, according to the minister, have some kind of idea of what kind of regulations might be needed if the insurance companies don't behave like good little doobies until after the election. But of course, Mr. Speaker, it takes time to have those regulations prepared and proclaimed. And you can be darn sure, Mr. Speaker, that it would be well after an election. And then after an election, the government was saying, oh, we got to 2007 before we need to worry about it again. And it becomes a non-issue. Except for the Minister of Finance, whoever that may happen to be, who will be sitting there and wringing his hands in glee, thinking about all those more loonies and toonies that flow into the coffers of the provincial government because every time the insurance rates get cranked up. I think somebody's asking who's going to fill the current Minister of Finance shoes. From what I've seen on the budget debate, I think they're hoping it'll be the current member from Cape Breton the Lakes, Mr. Speaker. I think that's who they're planning for it to be. Hoping, anyway. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, because every time the rates go up, the Tories profit. Because every time the rates go up by $100, they make $4. And the straight tax on it. Do you know the rates Nova Scotians, through their, or as a result, I should say, of the abuse that they have taken at the hands of the insurance companies, have had to contribute an amount that would be equal to, just about equal to, what the Minister of Finance claims was his surplus last year. You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia families are being hurt and hurt badly by this insurance rates. There's nobody in here, I don't imagine, knows any better than the member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, who spoke passionately, in a sort of irrational way, I must admit, but passionately irrational, during the late debate. But he certainly would know how these insurance rate hikes have hurt the trucking industry. How they have hurt the trucking industry in this province, Mr. Speaker. And those who make their living in the trucking industry and those businesses that depend upon trucks. And you know, Mr. Speaker, and this is a point that the member does know, and it's something I'd asked him, do you know what profession has more people employed in it than any other profession in North America? And the same would apply for Nova Scotia, and it is the trucking industry. The trucking industry that we depend on for everything. Everything I've got on. All of the paper in this place. Our pens and papers. Sometime the carpet. All the furnishings in this building, Mr. Speaker, unless it was a stone that came originally way back when the building was built. Everything in the grocery stores, in businesses, they depend on the trucks. The member says, if you got it, the truck bought it. Brought it. But what is happening to those trucking companies, those independent truckers, and those small businesses that depend upon trucks, Mr. Speaker? I know I've talked to some in my community, the community of Sackville, that have said that their insurance rates have gone absolutely through the roof. They're hurting. And that means that those hurting costs, if they can't eat them, they have to pass them on. If they eat them, those kind of increases, they may well be gone, Mr. Speaker. That can be the straw that breaks their back. And Mr. Speaker, saying, as this bill does, that if a rate increase was to be announced after May, it won't come into effect until next January. That's all this does. It doesn't roll it back. It doesn't freeze it. It doesn't say that the rates aren't approved. It just simply delays it for a few months. That may, Mr. Speaker, help some of those businesses for the short term, but it doesn't dodge the bullet. If the government had wanted to do something positive, you could have introduced legislation, not a political piece of fluff aimed at trying to deflect attention and to put this off until after the election. You could have introduced a piece of legislation that would have taken concrete steps to bring down insurance rates and, Mr. Speaker, to put an end to discrimination. I don't think I'm the only one in this House who has heard from constituents about insurance rates. I'm not going to use anybody's names as I'm going through here, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not even paying any attention to my notes.
What notes?
But you know, Mr. Speaker, here is a kind of story that I have heard. For example, one gentleman told me that his broker, from whom he used to get his automobile insurance, contacted him to tell him that the insurance company that normally underwrote his policy had taken that business away from that insurance broker. So that broker could no longer write insurances on a particular company. So the broker said, well, I'm looking around for other insurance companies where I can place your insurance. Clean driving record for years, 20 to 30 years. But the broker was no longer the underwriter for that particular insurance company. And the other companies that broker dealt with would only take that person on as a new insured client. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? The facility rates. And the company that he had been with, great way to treat a loyal customer, somebody who carried their coverage with you for years, they wouldn't let them switch it to another broker. No. So, all of a sudden, this gentleman's insurance was going to jump by about 200% to get coverage. Clean driving record. Now tell me, anybody in here think the government's bill is going to do anything about that?
Not going to do a thing, John.
Not going to do a thing to help that person. You know.
Order, please. The honourable member allow for an introduction. The honourable member for Sackville Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, today in our West Gallery we have visiting from the 1st Hammonds Plains Scout Troop. On behalf of myself and the member for St. Margaret's Prospect as well, I would add, number 17 youth and 7 adults, Colleen Vincent, Grant Smith, Phil Ginsey, Mrs. Katzberg, Dan Ferguson, Mr. Redden, and David McLean, along with 17 young people involved in scouting. And if I could ask them to stand and receive the usual warm welcome from the House. Mr. Speaker, they had the usual tour of the House today and are very interested in the debates that are going on here today.
Thank you. We certainly welcome our guests to the gallery this evening and hope to enjoy the proceedings. It came at a good time. There's a good debate taken on the House in regards to automobile insurance. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Indeed, and I have to therefore, since I used to be, I have to now remember to be on my best behavior. And Mr. Speaker, I certainly do also welcome our guests. It's always great to have young people in the gallery, and Scout movement certainly is something that in my former life before I got elected here is one of the things that I used to enjoy once upon a time, being a cub and beaver leader, and I think I can even remember the salutes and all those kind of things that went along with that and the mottos that were with it, Mr. Speaker. And I would have to say, though, Mr. Speaker, in terms of what we're doing here tonight, it's not really so much as a debate, although it's called a debate. We're talking about the bill that is introduced by the government, and they are, I'm sure that a guest in the gallery will get the idea, if they haven't already, that some of us on this side of the House are not overly impressed with the efforts of the government, Mr. Speaker, with regard to insurance rates. And we think that they do have some ulterior motives, Mr. Speaker. Ulterior motives, and that meaning that they are slightly different in truth from that which they are publicly stating, Mr. Speaker, because they have to downplay the political motivation behind that which is motivating them here today, Mr. Speaker. It might have something to do with that date with the electorate, which is coming up very soon. That's true. The member from Colchester Muscatobits over there is saying that I'm impugning motives. No, I'm not impugning them. I'm stating them. Slight difference, Mr. Speaker. I'm not impugning that they're motives. I'm stating quite categorically that that is a primary motivation and driving force behind what this government is doing. You know, Mr. Speaker, and I talked a little while ago about that facility insurance and the fact that this legislation does absolutely nothing to help those on facility insurances. And you know, what I didn't point out is that the insurance companies have already told the UARB that those facility insurance rates are going up by 1/3 in June. That's next month, Mr. Speaker, next month. I was talking about trucking. And the member from Colchester Muscatobit Valley, and in fact the member from Yarmouth, because he's had a construction business, he may still do that. The member from the Eastern Shore has a construction business as well. I don't know how many vehicles you have, Mr. Speaker, either one of them. But if you have a fleet of 5 or more, you'll get 6. You should speak to the government house leader. Because you know, if you have 5 or more, you can still be hit with rate increases. You can still be hit with rate increases. And if you would like to know the clause afterwards, Mr. Speaker, that he can go and talk to the minister about, please see me afterwards and I will educate you on what clause in the bill is going to be causing you problems. So the member from the Eastern Shore, his business with a fleet of 6 vehicles, can still face the automobile insurance rate increases. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? One of the other things that today's families can affect or be affected by the insurance companies to get around this, they can turn around and reclassify. We've had members of this House in our caucus bring forward examples, true examples, where people have been told that their insurance rates are going up because of, quote, their postal code. Their postal code. Yes, indeed. The member from Chester St. Margaret, you know about that one. Because insurance companies decide absolutely nothing to do with the driving record of the individual. You on a postal code?
Order, please. I'll member Colchester Muscatobit Valley, in a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, the venerable member for Sackville-Cobequid has offered several illustrations and examples of how the insurance has impacted Nova Scotians, and we certainly agree on this side that it is a reason of concern and have brought forward legislation, but we're just wondering, and I think perhaps some of his constituents may be wondering when he's going to stand in his place and offer some practical solutions for this problem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Another point of order, but the honourable member Sackville-Cobequid has the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that I welcome that. And let me just point out, Mr. Speaker, and this isn't the original document. This is a photocopy. It is a photocopy of a brochure that was sent. It was sent to Nova Scotians. And I know, Mr. Speaker, I personally sent this to many thousands of residents of Sackville.
You've heard back from them.
And yes, those comments are rolling in. And what it does, Mr. Speaker, the brochure points out, and this isn't information taken from us. It's not NDP propaganda that we prepared. It is information. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, we got a pretty powerful and far-reaching stretch, Mr. Speaker, because we've got national and international research organizations, supposedly independent, now I guess working for us, as well as Stats Canada. But you know, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that points out is that for a comparable car, and it's a 2003 Taurus, 4-door sedan, 4-door, Mr. Speaker, that the insurance rates for identical coverage in Winnipeg, Manitoba, for your clarification, that's where it is. I'm sure the young people in the galleries would know where Winnipeg is. The insurance rates there are $1,164. If we go to the neighboring province, Saskatoon, which is in Saskatchewan, the price for the insurance goes up to $1,263 for exactly the same coverage. Vancouver, same insurance on the same car, the same driving record, it would cost you $1,630. And let's skip over a few, Mr. Speaker, and come all the way to Halifax, Nova Scotia. The same insurance coverage, which cost $1,164 in Manitoba, here, where you represent constituent, costs $2,574. That's well over double the price. So you want to have a question about what I think is going to be a good solution, Mr. Speaker. It's to stop kowtowing to the big friends of yours in the insurance industry and start to put in place programs that are going to genuinely drive down insurance rates. Now, Mr. Speaker, the insurance industry wants everybody, you know, they run around and I hear Mr. Forgeron, the paid lobbyist for big industry, the big insurance company, whose primary interest is to suck as many dollars out of Nova Scotia pockets as they can to ship to their shareholders, mainly in the States. They say that this is all because of soft tissue injuries. I'm going to give you a personal example with one of my vehicles.
Tell us about it, John.
And Mr. Speaker, our van was struck in the back. It was a very minor injury. The vehicle that struck the van had, what do you call one of those hooks on the front that you would tug something or pull something with? A tow hook. A tow hook, yes. And all it did was it cut and punched a hole in the rubber on the bumper. So, Mr. Speaker, needless to say, the gentleman who struck the vehicle didn't want to go to his insurance company because he knew that the rate would go through the roof. A small accident claim like that would drive his rate through the roof for years, and the insurance company would recoup what they paid out 5-10-fold over the next couple of years, if not more. And I, Mr. Speaker, even though our vehicle was not at fault, our rate, since the vehicle was involved in an accident, could also well go up. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I took the vehicle to the dealer where we bought it, and I asked for an estimate on the cost of getting it repaired. And the price was just under $500. It was $497, because all they had to do was to take the coating off, or the rubber that's on the bumper off. Apparently it can be taken off. You put a patch of some sort behind it. They do some kind of ironing, and they can paint it and put the same one back on. They didn't even have to replace it. So I then went and took it to another company, and I asked for an estimate. And I was given a quote of just approximately $1,000. And needless to say, I wasn't impressed. I wasn't impressed by that double rate. And I started to question it. When I questioned it, they said, oh, we'll give you a 10% break off that. I'm sure we can do 10% for you. But then they gave me the quote sheets. And I looked at it, because they're telling me this is what it would cost. And I look at it and I see an hour and a half for electrical work. And I said, an hour and a half for electrical work? What electrical work are you going to do? You're not going to touch a wire. And they said, well, no, we won't. But that's what is permitted on these estimate claims. An hour and a half electrical time is allocated. So then I asked, what is this hour and a half for sheet metal work? I got the same response. Then I got a question. This is an insurance claim, isn't it? This is an insurance claim because these are the forms that the insurance company give to the dealers or to the body shops and say what is allowable and what they will pay. And Mr. Speaker, they were going to charge the maximum amount that the insurance company's program tells them they will pay. And when I said, no, it's not an insurance claim, I'm paying for it myself, you know what? The price dropped to just over $400. And I walked out the door. I'd pay more to get the work done somewhere else than to have somebody escalate the price by over 100%, Mr. Speaker. What is the insurance industry doing to solve that? Nothing. Why should they? Because they can crank the claim prices up. And what is the government doing to address that issue? Nothing, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians are being hosed. Mr. Speaker, if an insurance company wants to increase your rates and you're not going to be prepared to pay a higher rate, then they can turn around to you and say, well, we aren't going to cover you anymore. We're dropping you as a customer. Unless you sign a legal document giving agreement to paying the higher rate that we want. And you tell me what Nova Scotia family, you speak to the VON nurse, you speak to the home care worker, you speak to the man or the woman in this province who needs their vehicle for work or to get to and from work, or maybe to transport their loved ones or seniors to doctor's appointments. You tell them, you either sign this or you get no insurance and therefore you won't be able to drive a car, or you'll be driven into facility insurance if you try to go to somebody else. Or you drive without insurance and then you're a criminal. Mr. Speaker, people are going to be bullied into the position, many of them, to feel that they have no choice but to pay the higher rates and to sign the documents. These are the same insurance companies that are sending letters to people, to clients, telling them that they have to go to the doctor and have the doctor give permission or give their doctor permission to send every bit of medical information, whether it has anything to do with your driving ability at all, to the insurance companies. That's an absolute invasion of privacy. And you know what? The minister's response and the premier's response is, well, we don't plan to have to go any further than this because we expect the insurance companies to be reasonable. You know, Mr. Speaker, I almost wonder if the insurance companies came along to them and said to the minister, look, we'd like to sell you the McDonald Bridge. Will you buy it? He'd say yes. He says we already own it. Yeah, I know you do. But you still buy it if they asked you. He got my point. He's the same one who said the insurance rates in Winnipeg or Manitoba are lower because it's flat roads. The Flat Earth Society, yes. Yes, Mr. Speaker. The insurance companies have other ways of doing it. You know, most people, if they have more than one vehicle, they get a discount. Insurance companies kill that right away because you can't have competition, Mr. Speaker. They know that you can't get insurance anywhere else. If they want to turn around and reclassify you, maybe they'll decide that instead of some companies say instead of 70, we're going to drop down to 65. And we'll say that age 65 becomes a higher risk that they used to say at age 70. And so now at the age of 65, you're going to be classified as you would have before at the age of 70 because they can reclassify. And your rates go up. They can say to you, and they do, your car is older, so it's a greater risk. You're reclassified, your rates go up. And what does the government's bill to address those issues do? Zippo. Nothing, Mr. Speaker. Nothing at all. As I started my remarks, what I said is what the government is offering the person who is dying of thirst, not a glass of water, but a thimbleful. A thimble is better than nothing, but barely. But barely. Mr. Speaker, companies can switch. They can decide that what they're going to do, and they start a sub-company, and that's being done all the time, and they're going to switch your insurance from one company to another company. All owned by the same head gurus, same chief CEO running them both, same reporting to the same masters, board of directors, maybe in New York, maybe in London, maybe in The Hague. But since you've been switched to a different insurance company, the rates can change. Mr. Speaker, the minister said if the insurance companies act naughty, if they aren't the good little boys and girls that he expects them to be, then we can bring down with the hammer. We have ways to bring in the hammer if we have to. When asked what the hammer could be, the minister said, I'd rather not talk about it at this time. I'd rather not talk about it at this time because the election hasn't been held yet. So here I have to talk tough. After the election is over, Mr. Speaker, I'll trade my hammer for the feather or the wisp so I can sweep it under the rug. Mr. Speaker, suggesting, as the insurance companies are, soft tissue injuries are the major causes of driving up rates is a bunch of hogwash. I don't doubt for a second that it is having an impact. But I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, our insurance rates in Nova Scotia haven't gone up by 65% over the last year because soft tissue injuries have gone up claims by 65%. Not likely at all. But you know, let's say, hypothetically, I had claimed soft tissue injury when I was struck in another car, actually, Mr. Speaker, about a year and a half ago in the rear end of the car. Little damage was done, and, Mr. Speaker, I came through it quite a-okay. But let's say I had an injury. Let's say I was at a stop. The member said no wonder rates are going up the way I'm driving. Well, Mr. Speaker, on that one, I was stopped at a crosswalk, allowing somebody to go across when I was struck from behind. So I'm glad, whatever my infraction was, I'm glad, Mr. Speaker, I got hit rather than my running over the pedestrian. But that having been said, Mr. Speaker, if I had gotten a settlement from the insurance industry, which I didn't apply for because of soft injury or something else, and I invested that money in the stock market, and you know, the chances are very good if I'd done that, it would be worth less today than it was a year and a half or 2 years ago, because rates have gone down. I couldn't go back to that insurance company and say to them, whoops, my stock portfolio didn't perform very well, so I lost 40% of my investment. So look, would you please be good blokes over there? Would you be good fellas? And please make up that 40% that I lost. Plus make up the profit I didn't make that I expected. So how about give me an extra 50% more? They'd show me the door, maybe put me in a straitjacket and tell me some things that weren't very complimentary. Mr. Speaker, what Nova Scotians are being expected to pay for, what's happening is that the insurance companies, primarily I'd suggest is the main reason, despite what their paid lobbyists are saying, lost money in the stock market, their value went down, the dividends to the shareholders therefore went down, so what they've decided to do is turn up the heat on Nova Scotians and others who they can get at who are vulnerable. Crank up our rates, increase their revenue, increase the dividends they can pay, and build back up their portfolio. Mr. Speaker, that's really what's happening. And will the minister of the Flat Earth Society, who believes in the flat road theory about insurance rates, who's responsible, or maybe I should say whose irresponsible actions have led to the rates skyrocketing, Mr. Speaker, he knows, as each and every one of the Tory members over there know, that your bill is going to do absolutely nothing to drive down those rates. The 65% higher rates that Nova Scotians are unfairly paying now will still be being what they're being charged in 2 months from now. How much time have I got left, Mr. Speaker?
6:52.
Oh, so I got a whole 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, what we have is another political smokescreen. We saw the politics, Mr. Speaker, of the Minister of Finance with what I call the glass turkey budget, with the $155 checks that are supposed to be coming out and being arrived in people's mailboxes just about the same time, and maybe in fact the same day they go to vote. Now we've got a bill that is before us that is supposed to deflect attention and make the Tories look as if they're being proactive on an issue of primary concern to Nova Scotia families and Nova Scotia businesses as you head to the election. It's all electioneering. It's not about providing good government. It's not about providing responsible government. It's all about trying to protect the hindquarters of the Tory members of this House. And Mr. Speaker, the Government House Leader has an opportunity to agree to strengthen this bill to make it meaningful. And if he really wants to make it meaningful, let's say roll the rates back to what they were on March the 1st, 2002, when it was sent to the Utility Review Board. And yes, indeed, the insurance company will squawk, they'll cry, they might even become what the Minister of Government House Leader likes to call those who complain about the insurance rate increases. They might become, what was it, sniveling whiners? Yeah, sniveling whiners. They might whine and snivel. But you know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians would applaud. And Mr. Speaker, I doubt very much, despite all the, I'm sure they might take out some advertising and waste some of their money to cry and complain about it. But Mr. Speaker, it's a profitable business for them. They know it, and they're not going to pull up stakes and leave. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now a member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in my place this evening for a few moments and talk about Bill 45. Mr. Speaker, and as the previous speaker has said, I will vote for the bill because I think it's a little bit. Why, it certainly displays this government's inaction of what should be done, but I think it will help some Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, in a small way. So even in a small way, Mr. Speaker, will be help to many Nova Scotians who are facing difficult times, who are facing huge increases in insurance. And this bill goes without saying that the issue involved here is one that all of us in this province have an opinion on. Since one one way or another, it touches every home from one end of the province to the other. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are all aware of the stories from Nova Scotians about how their auto insurance rates have risen dramatically in the past year. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not only insurance, car insurance, it's home insurance. If you have an oil tank, or you have a wood stove, or any other avenue that the insurance companies can find to dip into your pocketbook and find a reason to increase your insurance rates, they do that, Mr. Speaker. But freezing rates until January 1st, 2004 is only a slight measure, Mr. Speaker. But that will undoubtedly provide some relief, albeit a small amount, but it will provide some relief to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, it will probably be some relief for me because my insurance comes due in November. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm one of the lucky ones. But what this bill clearly demonstrates is another example that this government demonstrated again that it prefers inaction rather than action. And this is a small measure, Mr. Speaker, as this government prepares to head into an election. And it goes without saying that I believe people want good insurance coverage, but they also want it, Mr. Speaker, at reasonable rates, rates that they can afford. And diligent effort by all parties to minimum costs to the system will assist in promoting these conditions, but this government's inaction has prolonged the problem. Mr. Speaker, by freezing insurance rate, this government is simply using it as a delaying tactic. They're trying to tell Nova Scotians that something is coming, but you have to wait. But, Mr. Speaker, I think the waiting should be over and the time is now. This issue has been before this House many times because Nova Scotians expected their government to address this issue. Some time ago, Mr. Speaker, this government should have acted some time ago because they knew this crisis was coming, Mr. Speaker. They could see it. This has been on the horizon, Mr. Speaker, for 2 years. Instead, a year after, or a year and a half after, and this could have been done, this government and the minister responsible says Nova Scotians will have to wait until the fall session of the legislature for legislation to be passed. This government could have had an insurance package ready to go during the spring session, Mr. Speaker, but decided to hide its head in the sand and wait for the issue to pass. Mr. Speaker, but the issue is not passing. It's growing larger every day. Because of this government's inaction, with half measures that include freezing rates and empty regulations, you can be sure that this issue will grow, and, Mr. Speaker, will continue to grow. It will continue to grow and force many rural residents in this province who must rely on their vehicles for transportation to probably, Mr. Speaker, choose to go without insurance. Sure, the government says it will address the unfairness issue by bringing in regulations. But seniors, those with older cars, those living in certain parts of the province, they want the details now, Mr. Speaker. They want help now. But this government tells them to wait until the fall when legislation will be passed. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if I may adjourn the debate and continue on Thursday due to the lateness of the hour.
The honourable member for Victoria has moved to adjourn debate. Agreed? Agreed. Agreed. The honourable government House Leader.
Opposition Day, the House and the leader of the Liberal Party will provide the agenda for tomorrow.
The honourable House Leader for the Liberal Party. Tomorrow's hours in order of business.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Tomorrow, following the daily routine and question period, we'll be calling resolution number 901 and bill number 21. I would now move adjournment of the House until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Motion to adjourn until tomorrow at 2 p.m. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary minded nay. Motion is carried. We're adjourned to 2 p.m.